At exactly 9:47 p.m. on a quiet Friday night in the small town of Ridgewood Falls, a 17-year-old girl named Lily Carter sent a text message that no one would read until it was too late, a message so ordinary on the surface, and yet so devastating in its hidden meaning that it would eventually expose a killer, shatter an entire community, and force investigators to rethink everything they believed about digital evidence, teenage vulnerability, and the silent cries for help that often go unnoticed. The message contained only 12 words, typed hastily with trembling fingers, sent from a cracked smartphone with barely 10% battery remaining. Yet those 12 words would become the most important piece of evidence in a murder investigation that would haunt law enforcement for years. What Lily knew in that final moment, and what she tried desperately to communicate without alerting the person standing only feet away from her, remains one of the most chilling examples of courage ever recorded in a criminal case. Before we uncover what that message said, where it was sent, and why it would become the key to solving a crime that initially seemed impossible to crack, take a moment to support this channel by liking this video and subscribing, because every story we share here is designed to reveal the hidden truths behind real-life mysteries and to honor the voices that were almost lost forever. Your support allows us to continue telling stories that matter, stories that demand attention, reflection, and empathy. Lily Carter had always been the kind of teenager teachers described as bright, kind, and quietly determined, a young woman who rarely drew attention to herself yet left a lasting impression on everyone who crossed her path. She excelled academically, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and dreamed of becoming a forensic psychologist, inspired by countless hours spent watching crime documentaries and studying how human behavior could reveal hidden truths. Friends often joked that Lily noticed details others ignored, from subtle changes in tone to barely perceptible shifts in body language, and this gift for observation would later prove tragically significant. Raised by a single mother who worked long shifts at a nearby hospital, Lily learned independence early, developing a maturity that set her apart from many of her peers. In Ridgewood Falls, a town where everyone seemed to know everyone else, Lily was considered safe. The streets were lined with manicured lawns, porch lights glowed warmly at night, and crime was something people associated with distant cities, not their own neighborhoods. Parents rarely worried when their children walked home from school, and doors were often left unlocked during the day. It was precisely this illusion of security that made what happened to Lily so devastating, because no one believed something so violent could occur in a place so peaceful. On the evening of her disappearance, Lily had told her mother she was going to meet a friend to study for an upcoming chemistry exam at the local library. She left the house wearing a gray hoodie, jeans, and her favorite sneakers, promising she would be home before 10. Her mother watched her walk down the driveway, phone in hand, earbuds in place, unaware that this would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. Surveillance footage later showed Lily entering the library at 6:18 p.m., sitting at a corner table, and working quietly for nearly 2 hours, completely unaware that someone had been watching her movements long before she arrived. According to investigators, Lily left the library shortly after 8:30 p.m., sending a casual text to her mother saying she was on her way home. Nothing about that message raised concern. Nothing suggested fear. Nothing indicated danger. Yet within an hour, her phone activity would change dramatically, shifting from routine teenage communication to a pattern that would later be recognized as silent distress. Analysts would eventually determine that during this time, Lily encountered someone she knew, someone she trusted enough to let her guard down, someone who had been quietly inserting himself into her life for months under the guise of friendship and support. This individual, whose name would later dominate headlines, had positioned himself as a protector, a confidant, and a mentor of sorts, offering rides, helping with school projects, and providing emotional reassurance during difficult moments. Behavioral experts would later describe this pattern as gradual grooming, a process in which trust is built slowly and strategically, making the victim less likely to recognize danger when it finally appears. Lily, intelligent and perceptive as she was, had sensed something was off in recent weeks, confiding to a close friend that she sometimes felt uncomfortable but couldn't explain why. Tragically, like many teenagers, she dismissed her instincts, convincing herself she was overreacting. At 9:42 p.m., Lily's phone connected to a cellular tower on the outskirts of town, an area near an abandoned service road bordered by dense woodland. This location made no sense given her usual route home. 5 minutes later, at 9:47 p.m., she sent the message that would later redefine the entire investigation. At the time, no one noticed. Her mother, busy finishing paperwork from work, assumed Lily was running late. Friends were distracted by social media and homework. Life continued, unaware that a life was slipping away in silence. When Lily failed to return home by midnight, panic began to set in. Her mother's calls went unanswered. Text messages remained unread. By 1:30 a.m., she contacted the police, initiating a search that would quickly escalate into a full-scale investigation involving volunteers, drones, and state authorities. What officers found the following afternoon, deep in the woods near the abandoned road, would send shockwaves through Ridgewood Falls and transform the quiet town into the epicenter of a national true crime obsession. But at that moment, as officers prepared to analyze Lily's phone, her messages, and her final digital footprint, none of them yet understood the significance of the 12 words she had sent in fear, courage, and desperation. None of them realized that she had, in her final moments, managed to leave behind a breadcrumb trail so subtle and so brilliant that it would ultimately lead them straight to her killer. Before we move into deeper parts of the story, where we will uncover what Lily's final text actually said, how investigators initially misinterpreted it, and why its true meaning was hidden in plain sight, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments, because your engagement helps keep stories like Lily's alive and ensures that voices silenced too soon are never forgotten. When detectives finally gained access to Lily Carter's phone in the early hours of Saturday morning, they expected to find chaos, panic, and frantic pleas for help, the kind of desperate digital trail that often accompanies a young person in danger. What they found instead was something far more confusing, something that at first glance appeared completely harmless, almost comforting and tragically misleading. The final message Lily sent at 9:47 p.m. did not contain words like help, danger, or call the police. It did not include crying emojis, capital letters, or frantic punctuation. Instead, it read, "I'm okay, staying late, don't wait up, love you." 12 simple words. Polite, reassuring, ordinary, the kind of message millions of teenagers send every night to calm worried parents. For nearly 48 hours, that text message became the reason investigators believed Lily had left voluntarily, the reason they delayed issuing an Amber Alert, and the reason critical hours were lost in what would become a race against time. On paper, it suggested safety. In reality, it was the most desperate lie Lily ever told. Digital forensics experts later determined that Lily typed the message unusually slowly, taking nearly 90 seconds to complete a sentence that would normally require less than 20. Each word was separated by irregular pauses. Each letter showed signs of hesitation. To trained analysts, this pattern indicated extreme emotional distress, often seen when a person is under pressure, being watched, or being forced to communicate falsely. But in the earliest stage of the investigation, no one was looking that deeply. They took the message at face value, assuming Lily had chosen to stay out late with friends. This initial misinterpretation reveals one of the most dangerous weaknesses in modern investigations, over-reliance on surface-level digital evidence. In an age where texts and social media updates are treated as windows into a person's state of mind, investigators sometimes forget that messages can be manipulated, coerced, or strategically crafted. Lily understood this. She knew that if she sent anything alarming, the person beside her might take her phone away, might escalate the situation, might end her life immediately. So she chose deception, but she embedded something inside it. While police focused on organizing search parties and canvassing the neighborhood, Lily's phone sat inside an evidence locker, quietly holding answers no one was ready to see. Her call log showed no outgoing emergency calls. Her social media accounts were inactive after 9:45 p.m. Her GPS data placed her near the service road. Nothing seemed out of place except one small detail that would later become monumental. Lily never, ever signed off messages to her mother without using her mother's nickname, Mama Bear. It was a private term of affection she had used since childhood. But in her final message, she wrote only, "Love you." To most people, that difference meant nothing. To her closest friend, it meant everything. 2 days after Lily was found, her best friend, Marissa Nguyen, was called in for questioning. Exhausted, traumatized, and barely holding herself together, Marissa asked investigators if she could see Lily's phone. When they showed her the final message, she froze. Her breathing slowed. Her hands began to shake. Then she whispered something that made every detective in the room straighten in their chairs. "She never texts like that," Marissa said. "Never. That's not Lily." At first, officers assumed grief was distorting Marissa's memory. But when they asked for proof, she unlocked her own phone and scrolled through hundreds of messages, showing years of conversations where Lily always signed off the same way. Always with Mama Bear. Always with a heart emoji. Always with a joke. The final message lacked all of it. It was stripped of personality. It was mechanical. It was fake. Forensic linguists were brought in to analyze Lily's writing patterns. Their conclusion was devastating. The message had been constructed deliberately to sound neutral, safe, and unremarkable. It showed signs of linguistic suppression, a phenomenon in which a person minimizes emotional expression under threat. In other words, Lily was trying not to reveal herself. Then investigators noticed something even more disturbing: the capitalization pattern. Every word in the message was capitalized correctly. Lily, like most teenagers, almost never bothered with perfect grammar in texts. Her previous messages were filled with lowercase letters, abbreviations, and slang. But this one was flawless. Perfect punctuation. Perfect structure. It was written as if someone else was watching. Someone who demanded control. Cell tower data confirmed that Lily's phone remained stationary for nearly 12 minutes after sending the message. She didn't move. She didn't respond to anyone. She didn't browse social media. Experts interpreted this as a sign that she was no longer in possession of her phone. At this stage, investigators shifted their focus. They began reviewing Lily's recent contacts more closely. One name appeared repeatedly in her message history during the weeks before her death: Daniel Harper. Daniel was 23, a former student aide at Lily's school and a volunteer tutor who helped struggling students prepare for college exams. He had met Lily through an after-school program and gradually became part of her daily routine. He drove her home sometimes, helped her with homework, listened when she complained about stress. To outsiders, he looked like a supportive mentor. To behavioral analysts, he looked like a textbook predator. Their messages revealed emotional dependency, subtle manipulation, and increasing control. Daniel often positioned himself as the only person who truly understood Lily. He criticized her friends, questioned her family, encouraged secrecy. In psychological terms, he was isolating her. On the night Lily disappeared, Daniel claimed he was at home playing video games. Several friends supported this alibi. But when investigators subpoenaed server logs, they discovered something troubling. Daniel logged out of his account at 8:12 p.m. and did not log back in until after midnight. More disturbingly, his phone pinged off the same tower as Lily's at 9:41 p.m. Still, there was no physical evidence, no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no confession. The case stalled. Public pressure mounted. Online forums exploded with theories. Some blamed strangers. Some blamed gangs. Some blamed the police. And all the while, Lily's 12 words sat quietly in evidence, waiting for someone to notice what she had hidden inside them. Because embedded in that simple sentence was a pattern, a code, a final act of defiance that no one had yet recognized. Before we uncover how a high school computer club student cracked Lily's message and expose the truth investigators had missed, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments, because your engagement helps keep justice alive and keeps stories like Lily's from fading into silence. For nearly 3 weeks after Lily Carter was laid to rest beneath a quiet canopy of white lilies, trembling oak branches, and whispered prayers from a grieving community, her case slowly drifted into the most dangerous stage of any unsolved investigation: silence. The early outrage that had once flooded social media and news broadcasts began to fade as new tragedies replaced her story in the public eye, while tips that once poured into the sheriff's office reduced to scattered fragments that led nowhere. Behind closed doors, detectives continued to work relentlessly, reviewing files, replaying footage, and revisiting timelines, yet without fresh evidence. Every effort felt like walking through dense fog without a clear destination. Meanwhile, Lily's parents existed in a painful state of suspended time, unable to move forward and unable to go back, surrounded by a home that still carried her presence in every corner, from the backpack resting on her chair to the notebooks arranged neatly on her desk, and most of all, to the sealed plastic bag containing her phone, which had become the last physical connection to her voice. As the investigation quietly stalled, no one could have predicted that the most important breakthrough would not emerge from a high-tech forensic laboratory or a seasoned homicide detective, but instead from a teenage student who had never met Lily and who simply refused to believe that her final message was meaningless. Ethan Morales, a 17-year-old honors student from a neighboring town, had developed a passion for cryptography and digital security through academic competitions and late afternoons spent experimenting in his school's computer lab. When he first encountered Lily's story online, he felt an inexplicable sense of unease, not because of the crime itself, but because of the message that investigators had publicly dismissed as ordinary. To most people, Lily's final text appeared normal and unremarkable, a polite explanation meant to calm her parents. Yet to Ethan, the structure of the sentence felt unnatural, carefully balanced in a way that suggested intention rather than coincidence. Driven by curiosity rather than expectation, Ethan copied the message into his notebook and began examining it using the same analytical methods he applied to encryption puzzles. He counted letters, compared patterns, and tested numerical sequences, slowly realizing that each word in Lily's message followed a precise structure that was statistically unlikely to occur by accident. As he mapped the number of letters in each word and compared them to common coding systems, he began noticing correlations that suggested Lily had been attempting to hide information beneath the surface of her words. Although the early results appeared fragmented and imperfect, Ethan recognized that this inconsistency itself was meaningful because it suggested a message created under emotional distress, fear, and time pressure, rather than one carefully designed in safety. After hours of refining his analysis, cross-referencing keyboard patterns, rearranging letter groupings, and applying positional decoding techniques, Ethan uncovered a disturbing conclusion. Lily's message contained a hidden accusation pointing directly toward Daniel Harper. The encoding was flawed, incomplete, and improvised, yet that imperfection became its strongest proof because it reflected the reality of a terrified teenager attempting to communicate truth while under threat. Lily had not been crafting a sophisticated cipher, nor had she been thinking like a professional cryptographer. Instead, she had been trying to protect herself in the only way she could, using ordinary language as a disguise for extraordinary courage. Recognizing the seriousness of what he had discovered, Ethan prepared a detailed breakdown of his findings, including screenshots, statistical comparisons, and logical explanations, before submitting them anonymously to the county sheriff's office. At first, his email was treated like many others that flooded the department after high-profile cases, most of which contained speculation, conspiracy theories, or emotional pleas without factual basis. However, Detective Rena Wallace, who specialized in behavioral analysis and digital evidence, decided to examine the submission more carefully, and as she reviewed the patterns and correlations, she became increasingly unsettled by how mathematically and psychologically consistent the findings were with someone attempting covert communication. Once the department's analysts verified that the probability of a message being accidental was extraordinarily low, the investigation was quietly reopened, and a strategic decision was made to avoid alerting Daniel Harper until enough corroborating evidence had been gathered. Detectives began reconstructing Daniel's movements using newly authorized warrants that allowed access to traffic cameras, toll records, parking surveillance, and transaction histories. As this data accumulated, Daniel's carefully constructed alibi began collapsing piece by piece, revealing a timeline that placed him alongside Lily during every critical moment leading up to her disappearance. Footage showed Daniel's car entering Pine Ridge Forest Road shortly after sunset, followed minutes later by video capturing Lily walking beside him toward the wooded area. Later recordings revealed his vehicle stationary near the service road at the exact time Lily's final message was sent, while subsequent footage documented his departure alone less than 15 minutes later. Forensic teams added further confirmation when soil samples collected from Daniel's tires matched sediment from the creek bank where Lily's body had been found, and fibers recovered from her clothing were traced back to his jacket. Even more damaging was the discovery of internet searches on Daniel's phone that included phrases related to hypothermia, body concealment, and location tracking deletion, all conducted weeks before Lily's death. When Daniel was finally brought in for questioning, he initially presented himself as cooperative, emotional, and confused, offering rehearsed explanations that blamed unknown strangers and unfortunate coincidences. He insisted that Lily had chosen to stay behind voluntarily, and claimed that he had left her safely, attempting to frame himself as a concerned friend who had been unfairly targeted by circumstance. However, as investigators methodically dismantled his narrative using synchronized footage, forensic data, and the reconstructed message, his demeanor changed in subtle but revealing ways, shifting from defensive denial to visible recognition that his secret had been uncovered. After nearly 12 hours of interrogation, confronted with evidence that left no room for reinterpretation, Daniel confessed. He admitted that his relationship with Lily had become emotionally manipulative and controlling, that he had grown desperate when she began pulling away and threatening to expose his behavior, and that he had persuaded her to meet him one final time under the pretense of reconciliation. During their argument near the creek, he acknowledged grabbing her in anger, causing her to fall and strike her head, and rather than seeking medical help, he chose to abandon her in freezing conditions, believing the cold would erase his responsibility and silence her forever. What Daniel had failed to understand was that Lily's final act was neither accidental nor passive, but deliberate and defiant. Even while frightened and injured, she had managed to transform an ordinary message into a concealed testimony, embedding truth within familiarity so that it could pass unnoticed by her attacker while remaining discoverable by someone willing to look deeper. Her words, written under unimaginable pressure, became the most powerful evidence in the entire case, proving that intelligence and courage could outlast violence. At Daniel's sentencing hearing, Lily's parents stood before the court and listened as her final message was read aloud, not as a casual text, but as a declaration of resilience. When the hidden meaning was explained, her mother spoke quietly but firmly, telling the courtroom that her daughter had refused to be erased, that she had fought for justice with her final breath, and that she had solved her own murder when no one else could. In that moment, Lily was no longer remembered only as a victim, but as a symbol of strength whose voice could not be buried. As we examine Lily's lasting legacy, the psychological lessons behind covert communication, and the ways her case reshaped digital investigations nationwide, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments, because every interaction helps ensure that stories like Lily's continue to be heard, understood, and honored. Long after the courtroom doors closed and the final sentence was delivered, Lily Carter's story refused to settle into the quiet category of resolved cases that slowly fade from public memory, because her journey represented something far greater than a tragic ending and a criminal conviction. Across the United States, law enforcement agencies, digital forensics units, and academic institutions began studying her case, not only for its investigative breakthroughs, but for the extraordinary psychological clarity she demonstrated under unimaginable pressure. Experts analyzed how a teenager, facing fear, isolation, and uncertainty, had managed to preserve truth through coded language, emotional discipline, and strategic foresight, transforming her final moments into a permanent record that could not be erased. In training seminars and criminal justice programs, Lily's message became a case study in resilience, illustrating how victims are often more aware, more courageous, and more resourceful than society gives them credit for. Within her hometown, the impact was even more profound because the community had been forced to confront uncomfortable realities about trust, familiarity, and hidden danger. Parents who once assumed that knowing their children's friends meant knowing their children's safety began reassessing how easily manipulation could hide behind charm and long-standing relationships. Schools introduced expanded digital safety programs, emphasizing emotional boundaries, coercive behavior, and the subtle signs of psychological control that often precede physical violence. Counselors reported that students felt empowered to speak openly about uncomfortable relationships for the first time, inspired by Lily's example of refusing silence even when her voice was threatened. Her story did not create fear but awareness, and that awareness reshaped the culture of the town in ways that statistics alone could never measure. For investigators, Lily's case marked a turning point in how digital communication was interpreted during missing persons and homicide investigations. Previously, final messages were often viewed only through their surface meaning, evaluated for emotional tone or immediate content, while subtle structural patterns were rarely considered significant unless explicitly suspicious. After Lily's case, departments nationwide began training officers to analyze messages for hidden intent, irregular linguistic patterns, and contextual anomalies, recognizing that victims sometimes attempt covert communication when direct disclosure feels impossible. Software tools were updated to flag unusual syntactic arrangements, repeated numerical structures, and atypical phrasing that could indicate coded messaging, transforming what was once dismissed as coincidence into a recognized investigative pathway. Ethan Morales, whose curiosity had unlocked Lily's hidden message, found his life permanently altered by his involvement in the case. Not because he sought recognition, but because he had witnessed firsthand how small actions could create monumental consequences. Encouraged by law enforcement and academic mentors, he pursued advanced studies in cybersecurity and digital forensics, eventually working alongside federal agencies to develop tools for decoding covert communication in high-risk situations. In interviews, he often emphasized that he had not acted out of heroism, but out of empathy, explaining that he simply believed Lily deserved someone who would listen carefully enough to understand what she was truly saying. His story became a reminder that justice is not only enforced by authority, but often initiated by ordinary individuals who refuse to ignore uncomfortable questions. For Lily's parents, healing was neither immediate nor simple, because no verdict could restore what had been stolen, and no sentence could rewrite the future that had been taken from their daughter. Yet, over time, they transformed their grief into advocacy, establishing a foundation dedicated to teaching young people about digital safety, emotional autonomy, and covert communication strategies for dangerous situations. Through workshops, online resources, and school partnerships, they ensured that Lily's knowledge would become shared protection rather than private tragedy. Every presentation, every conversation, and every resource distributed carried the same underlying message. Silence is never the only option, even when fear tries to convince you otherwise. Psychologists who studied Lily's final actions identified a phenomenon known as cognitive resilience under threat, a rare but powerful capacity in which individuals maintain strategic thinking despite emotional distress. Rather than becoming paralyzed by fear, Lily had compartmentalized her anxiety, assessed her circumstances, and selected the most effective method of communication available to her. This ability, experts concluded, was cultivated through emotional intelligence, problem-solving skills, and a deep internal sense of self-worth, qualities that could be taught and strengthened through education. Her case, therefore, became a catalyst for integrating emotional resilience training into youth development programs nationwide. As years passed, Lily's story continued circulating through documentaries, academic journals, and digital safety campaigns, not as sensationalized tragedy, but as an example of courage that transcended victimhood. Her face, once seen only in missing person posters and courtroom exhibits, became associated with empowerment, awareness, and quiet strength. People who had never met her spoke her name with respect, understanding that her final message had protected future victims by changing investigative standards and public awareness. Yet perhaps the most powerful legacy of Lily Carter was not found in institutions, policies, or programs, but in individual choices made quietly every day. It appeared in the teenager who decided to speak up about an unhealthy relationship before it escalated. It appeared in the parent who learned to listen without judgment. It appeared in the friend who recognized warning signs and refused to stay silent. It appeared in the countless unseen moments where courage replaced fear, because Lily had proven that truth could survive even in darkness. In the end, Lily did not merely leave behind evidence, but instruction, teaching the world that strength is not measured by physical power, but by clarity of purpose, moral conviction, and the refusal to surrender one's voice. Her final message, once hidden within ordinary words, became an eternal declaration that justice can be planted in the smallest spaces and still grow into something unbreakable. Though her life was cut short, her impact extended far beyond time, reminding us that even in our most vulnerable moments, we still possess the power to protect truth. If Lily's story moved you, challenged you, or made you see the world differently, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments, because every interaction helps ensure that stories like hers continue to reach hearts, raise awareness, and save lives.